My parents handed my sister a brand new Honda for her 16th and gave me a bus pass for mine, saying, "It builds character." I swallowed it, stayed quiet, but my grandma heard everything and never said a word. 2 years later, on my 18th birthday, a tow truck pulled into our driveway and the driver stepped out asking, "Are you Audrey?" He placed a set of keys in my hand and pointed to what he'd brought. My mom dropped her coffee the second she saw it. Because what was sitting on that truck changed everything they thought they knew about me. The silence in our house has a specific weight to it, a heavy density that settles into the floorboards and reminds me exactly where I stand. My mother did not even look up from her coffee as she handed me the envelope, her thumb scrolling through her phone as if my existence were a minor notification she was clearing from her screen. For my 16th birthday, they gave me a bus pass while telling me it builds character, a phrase parents use when they want to disguise neglect as a life lesson. My grandmother was there that day, sitting on the porch in her wicker chair, watching my sister Paige scream with delight over a brand new Honda Civic, while I stood at the edge of the lawn holding a paper plate with a single slice of grocery store cake. For 2 years, Grandma Ruth said nothing, her eyes tracking the disparity like a silent bookkeeper recording a mounting debt. Then, on the morning of my 18th birthday, a towing company pulled into our driveway, and the world my parents built on the foundation of favoritism finally began to crack. We live in Ridgemont, Ohio, the kind of town where status is measured by the shine of your car and whether your kid made the varsity team. From the outside, our 3-bedroom on Maple Hill looks perfect with its white siding and decent yard, but inside, the math never added up. Paige's bedroom was a rotating gallery of Pinterest trends, repainted every 2 years from lavender to sage to a specific shade of blush pink, furnished with Pottery Barn teen desks and expensive curtains. My room still held the sky blue walls I had when I was 12, and my books sat on a particle board shelf my father assembled incorrectly, leaving it with a permanent lean to the left. At first, I didn't keep score because children assume their parents have reasons for the things they do. But as I grew, the reasons piled up like evidence in a courtroom. Paige got a new iPhone every autumn for her cheerleading group chats. I used my mother's hand-me-down with a shattered screen and a battery that surrendered by noon. The week before my junior year, I found an $800 receipt in the kitchen trash for Paige's cheerleading uniforms and travel bags. That same afternoon, I asked for $60 for an AP biology textbook that the school wouldn't provide. My mother pulled a face, a look of mild inconvenience, and told me the budget was tight before suggesting I find it used online. I did find it used, for $18 with a bent cover, and I highlighted every single page until I earned a 5 on the exam. Paige wore her warm-ups once and left them in her locker for 3 months. I learned early that being low maintenance wasn't a compliment, even though Mom said it like one. It was a survival strategy one had perfected to avoid the sting of being told no. The day that truly defined the divide was September 14th, my 16th birthday. It was a Tuesday, and there were no streamers, no guests, and no cake from the real bakery on Main Street. I walked into the kitchen to find an envelope leaning against the fruit bowl, tossed carelessly between the bananas and a stack of coupons. Inside was a Metro Valley 30-day bus pass and a card with happy birthday written in gold foil. Mom poured her coffee, her back to me, and called it practical. She told me I would thank them later. My father had already left for work, his signature on the card written in my mother's handwriting. I took that envelope upstairs and sat on my bed for a long time, turning the plastic pass over in my hands. It had a magnetic strip and a cartoon bus logo that looked like it was designed for a child. That night, I cried in the bathroom with the faucet running so the sound of the water would drown out the sound of my heart breaking. It wasn't about the bus, it was about the fact that it was so obvious to them that this was all I deserved. The following morning at 5:45 a.m., I stood at the Route 7 stop in the dark Ohio chill. My welcome committee was a man in a hard hat who nodded at me as we waited for the exhaust fumed transport to arrive. I told myself it didn't matter, a mantra I repeated for 2 years until Paige's 16th birthday arrived. On March 18th, our backyard was transformed into a festival of favoritism. 25 people gathered around a 3-tier fondant cake while string lights twinkled above. In the driveway, a white Honda Civic sat under a red bough the size of a beach ball. Paige's scream was so piercing it set off the neighbor's dog 2 houses down. My mother had her phone out before Paige even touched the door handle, recording the whole thing for a Facebook post titled "Our baby girl deserves the world." I stood near the cooler, holding a plate of cake I had no appetite for, watching the spectacle. No one asked me how I felt, but Grandma Ruth was watching from the porch. She saw me standing on the periphery, and I saw something in her face tighten, a silent decision being made behind her eyes. When a neighbor whispered a comment about me only getting a bus pass, Grandma simply said, "She did." Those 2 words held 2 years of planning I didn't know about yet. From that day on, I stopped waiting for my parents to see me. I got a job at Millstone Coffee, working 5:30 a.m. shifts before school. I learned to pull espresso shots and close a register to the penny under the watchful eye of Mr. Delaney. I saved every tip in a mason jar and every paycheck in a savings account Grandma Ruth helped me set up. By the time I was 17, I had saved $3,200. I took the bus to every college interview and every volunteer shift, even when I was exhausted. Once, I asked to borrow the family van for an internship interview 40 minutes away where no bus route existed. My mother didn't even look up from her phone, claiming Paige needed the van for cheer practice. I took the bus as far as it would go and walked the rest, arriving 10 minutes late and damp with sweat. When the interviewer asked, I told her the truth about the transit. I got the position, but the logistics were a nightmare. Every time I visited Grandma Ruth, she asked about my grades and my job, never the car or my mother. Then, one afternoon, she asked if I had my driver's license. When I said yes, she simply nodded with a look that suggested she was 3 moves ahead of everyone else in the family. 3 months before my 18th birthday, the acceptance letter from Westfield College arrived. It was a great school, but it was 40 minutes away with no public bus route. I sat my parents down with index cards, showing them my $3,200 in savings and asking only for the small gap to buy a used Corolla. My mother cut me off before my father could agree, claiming they couldn't afford it because of Paige's upcoming cheer nationals. That night, I saw the family iPad unlocked on the counter. My mother hadn't been looking for a car for me. She had been browsing newer sedans for Paige to have when she went to college. I stared at myself in the mirror, foam from my toothbrush on my lips, feeling ridiculous for ever hoping for something different. The bus pass hadn't built character. It had built a wall between me and the people who were supposed to love me. As my 18th birthday approached, the house remained eerily quiet. There were no shared Google Docs for my party, no custom napkins, and no catering lists like the ones Mom had painstakingly created for Paige. I tried one last time to ask for help with the car, finding a $4,000 Toyota online. My mother told me to ask when they weren't paying for Paige's regional competition. When I pointed out it was only regionals, not nationals, she just doubled down. My father sat there, a man made of routine and avoidance, moving food from his plate to his mouth without saying a word. I realized then that he wasn't cruel. He was just a coward who found it easier to let my mother dictate the hierarchy of their daughters. I left the table in silence, the only sound being the water running over my dish. Paige followed me, offering a half-hearted apology while suggesting the bus wasn't that bad. I asked her if she had ever actually ridden the Route 7, and the look of confusion on her face told me everything. She didn't know because she didn't have to know. A week later, I overheard my mother on the phone telling a friend that I preferred the bus because I wasn't materialistic and liked the independence. She spoke about me like I was a different species that didn't require the same care as a normal daughter. I stood in the hallway, my nails digging into my palms, listening to her lie about my contentment. I didn't confront her. Instead, I texted Grandma Ruth 3 words, "She is lying." The reply came back instantly, "I know." In that moment, the ground beneath me finally felt solid. I didn't know what was coming, but for the first time in 18 years, I knew I wasn't standing alone. The silence that followed our birthday dinner was different from the usual quiet of our home. It felt like the stillness after a storm has broken the horizon. On Wednesday, I had finally tested the waters, asking if we were doing anything for my 18th. My mother was unloading the dishwasher, and she paused just long enough to signal that she had completely forgotten before performing the act of remembering. She told me we would do a family dinner on Saturday, which I knew was a translation for whatever she felt like cooking, a grocery store cake from the Kroger bakery. and a card with $50 that my father would likely sign in the car on his way home from a job. I simply said it sounded great because I had graduated from crying about birthdays a year ago. I went upstairs and stared at the cracks in my ceiling, the same ones that had been spreading since I was 14, while knowing that Paige's ceiling had been replastered just last spring. I didn't feel the sting as sharply this time, though, because I knew Grandma Ruth wasn't planning nothing, and that was more than anyone else in this house had ever given me. September 14th arrived with the mechanical precision of a body clock tuned by 2 years of early morning coffee shop shifts. I woke up at 5:45 a.m. without an alarm. The house was a tomb of early morning shadows, save for the sound of the shower running as Dad prepared for a Saturday call-out to a burst pipe on the east side. The kitchen smelled of coffee and indifference. There were no pancakes or special breakfast traditions, just the same Tuesday morning energy on what should have been the most significant milestone of my young life. Dad came through the kitchen in his heavy work boots, handed me a plain white envelope, and squeezed my shoulder. He told me he was proud of me, 5 words that constituted the most emotional sentence Keith Forsyth had ever committed to paper. Then his truck was rumbling down the driveway before I had even finished reading the card. Mom appeared 20 minutes later, her hair in a clip and coffee in hand, offering a pleasant but forgettable greeting that felt like a coworker saying Happy Friday. Paige didn't surface until 9:30, offering a quick, one-armed hug before grabbing her keys and heading out in her Honda. I stood in the kitchen holding a cold mug of coffee and a $50 bill, which I knew I could earn in 2 shifts at Millstone. It was never about the money, though. It was about the message the money sent. By 5 o'clock, the house was thick with the scent of lasagna. It was my mother's favorite recipe, heavy on the ricotta and light on the thought that perhaps I would have preferred something else. I had never been asked what I wanted for my birthday dinner. That was a privilege reserved for Paige, who always chose steak. The doorbell rang at 5:15, and I opened it to find not just Grandma Ruth, but a full assembly: Uncle Glenn, Aunt Brenda, her husband Tom, and Mrs. Whitfield from next door, the woman who had witnessed the bus pass incident 2 years prior. Grandma was dressed in her finest emerald blouse, her hair perfectly set. She stepped past me, stating that my 18th birthday was worth looking nice for. My mother emerged from the kitchen, her face cycling through surprise and alarm as she realized her quiet, low-effort family dinner had been turned into a public event. Grandma Ruth hadn't brought a gift bag or a card, she had brought witnesses. Dinner was a cramped affair of bumping elbows and clinking silverware. The tension was a living thing beneath the surface of the polite conversation. Aunt Brenda, whether out of genuine curiosity or a calculated desire to stir the pot, asked what I had received for the Big 18. The table fell into a sudden, heavy silence as everyone became fascinated by their lasagna. I quietly mentioned that the dinner was my gift. When Mom tried to cover by saying I was low maintenance and didn't care for big gifts, Brenda pointed out the obvious disparity with Paige's car. Mom's defense was immediate: Paige had activities, and I did not. Paige chimed in, claiming I was fine with the bus, but I set my fork down and corrected her with a steady, quiet voice. I told her I never said that. The accountability hit the room like a physical weight. Mom tried to turn the situation into an accusation of her being a terrible mother, but Uncle Glenn and Grandma Ruth weren't buying the performance. My mother's eyes went wet, the practiced tears she used for deployment rather than true emotion, as she asked what more I could possibly want after being given a roof and food. I didn't flinch. I told her I simply wanted to be treated fairly. Grandma Ruth finally broke her silence, the clink of her teacup in the saucer acting like a gavel. She agreed that life wasn't equal, then stood up and told me to come outside. The evening air in Ridgemont was amber and warm, smelling of cut grass and charcoal grills. Then, the low diesel rumble of a flatbed truck began to echo down Maple Hill. We watched as a tow truck turned the corner, moving with a deliberate slowness. Strapped to the back, gleaming under the streetlights, was a nautical blue Toyota 4Runner. It was so new the temporary tags were still in the window. The driver hopped out and asked for Audrey Forsyth. When he placed the keys in my hand, my voice felt like it belonged to someone else. Grandma Ruth stood beside me, her hand steady on my shoulder, a woman who had waited 2 years for this exact moment of justice. The sound of my mother's coffee cup shattering on the porch steps punctuated the silence. She stood frozen, staring at the vehicle as if it were a hallucination. My father's reaction was a quiet, internal laugh, the sound of a man watching someone else finally show the courage he lacked. Paige stood in the doorway, her phone half raised, looking at her Honda Civic and then back at the 4Runner. The power dynamic of the driveway had shifted instantly. When Mom tried to claim Grandma was overstepping, Ruth reminded her that I was 18 and the title was already in my name. She threw Mom's own history of secret car purchases back at her, and for the first time, Dad stood his ground, quietly agreeing that Grandma was right. I sat in the driver's seat of the 4Runner, the scent of new leather filling my senses. My fingers were shaking as they gripped the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sensation of being seen. On the passenger seat, I found another envelope with Grandma's handwriting. Inside was the registration, 6 months of prepaid insurance, and a note with the address of the accounting firm for my internship. It said, Monday, 8 a.m., don't be late. I looked out the windshield at my family on the porch, Uncle Glenn grinning, Aunt Brenda taking photos, and my mother standing over the broken pieces of her cup. The next morning, Mom was waiting for me in the kitchen, her new mug gripped in both hands. She tried to launch into a rehearsed lecture about Grandma overstepping, but I sat down and told her the truth. I told her I wasn't angry, but I was done pretending things were equal. When she asked if I hated her, I told her I loved her, but I was keeping the car and I was going to my internship, and I was done apologizing for the fact that Grandma saw what she chose to ignore. Later, I found Dad in the garage. He finally admitted he should have spoken up a long time ago. I looked at him, no longer needing to hide behind the silence of our shared tasks. The truth was out, and while it was heavy, it was finally, undeniably fair. The silence in the garage was thick, but I knew that being quiet isn't the same as being neutral. Choosing silence is picking a side, and my father had picked my mother's side every single time. He didn't argue or try to deflect by saying marriage is complicated or that I didn't understand. He just sat there on his workbench and took the weight of my words, which was both the bravest and the saddest thing I had seen him do in 18 years. He finally admitted I was right. For the second time in 24 hours, he had validated my existence, setting a new personal record for honesty. When he told me he was proud of me for what it was worth, I let the sentiment hang in the air for a moment before telling him that while it was worth something, it would have been worth a lot more 2 years ago. He swallowed hard, his jaw working as he pushed his emotions down so they wouldn't leak out of his face. We didn't hug, but the pressure in the air finally dropped, allowing us both to breathe. When he asked if I needed help checking the tire pressure on the 4Runner, I simply said yes. That night, a soft knock came at my bedroom door, 2 taps, a pause, then a third. It was the knock of someone unsure of her welcome. Paige walked in wearing a cheerleading hoodie and no makeup, appearing without her usual armor. She admitted she didn't realize things were that bad. She hadn't known I was on the verge of losing my internship or that Mom had denied me the van. I looked at her from my desk and told her she didn't think about it because she didn't have to. Her voice cracked as she realized that was the worst part of it all. I could have been cruel, but Paige wasn't the villain of this story. She was just the byproduct of one. I told her it wasn't her fault she got a car, but that it hurt that nobody thought to ask why I didn't. As we sat in the quiet, she mentioned how nice my 4Runner was, and then asked me something I never expected. She asked if I could teach her how to budget. For the first time in years, I saw a sister I actually wanted to know. In a town like Ridgemont, news doesn't just travel, it detonates. By Monday morning, half the customers at Millstone Coffee were asking about the 4Runner. Mr. Delaney gave me a silent standing ovation by raising his eyebrows and complimenting my wheels. Mrs. Whitfield had clearly spread the word at her prayer group because 2 women came in just to look at me like a character in a book, one of them squeezing my hand and calling my grandmother a good woman. Aunt Brenda posted a photo of me and Grandma Ruth in the driveway with the keys, and the comments were filled with people calling my grandmother a legend. Mom was the one who had to deal with the fallout. People at her work began asking why I hadn't received a car years ago, forcing her to wear that specific, frozen smile she used when she was embarrassed. I didn't have to say a word. The car was its own announcement, and Ridgemont did the rest. A few days later, I came home to find Mom sitting at the kitchen table in the dim light, looking through an old photo album. She asked me to sit, her voice missing its usual sharp edges. She pointed to a photo of her and Aunt Carol from the 80s. Carol was in a crisp dress, while Mom wore a stained hand-me-down. She explained that Grandma Ruth hadn't played favorites on purpose, but Carol was simply easier and more agreeable, while Mom had been difficult and loud. She realized then that she had been doing the exact same thing to me. I told her I believed her, but that knowing the reason didn't undo the damage. All that mattered was what she did next. The next morning, for the first time in 18 years, she asked me how my internship was going. It was a small start, but it was a start. When I drove to Grandma Ruth's house that Saturday, the forerunner handled the county roads like silk. We sat on the porch with our tea, and she confessed she had been planning this for 23 months, ever since the day she watched me stand on the lawn with a paper plate while Paige got the Honda. She explained that she didn't say anything at the time because a fight wouldn't have changed my mother's nature. She knew that only actions on paper could change the dynamic. She had sold her rental property on Birch Street, her safety net, to buy the car, pay for the insurance, and cover the registration. She wanted me to start my life knowing I was worth more than a bus pass, and she had waited until I was 18, so the title would be in my name alone. No one could ever take it from me. 2 months later, our family wasn't perfectly fixed, but we were different. Mom started therapy after Dad and Grandma Ruth both pushed her to see that she was repeating a cycle of favoritism. Dad became a different man, sending me awkward texts about oil changes and visiting the coffee shop just to sit and watch me work. Paige surprised everyone by riding the Route 7 bus to school twice a week just to see what my life had been like. She lasted the whole semester, learning the names of the people I used to stand with in the dark. I finished my internship with a glowing recommendation and prepared to head off to campus for freshman orientation. As I drive the highway between Ridgemont and Westfield every morning, I think about the lessons people try to pull from stories like mine. I don't have a neat sentence to embroider on a pillow. I still feel the sting of the math that said one daughter deserved a car while the other deserved a bus pass. But I also have the memory of a grandmother who didn't just tell me I was strong, she showed me I was worth it. I keep the old bus pass in my dorm desk drawer, not out of spite, but to remind myself of the girl who waited in the dark at 5:45 a.m. for a future she had to build herself. The forerunner didn't change who I was, but it was the proof that someone was finally watching. I talk to my parents every Sunday now. It's awkward and real, but it's better. I have a firm rule about hanging up if the comparisons or the minimizing starts, and Mom is slowly learning to respect that boundary. Paige and I text almost every day, and while she's still unlearning the habits of being the favorite, she's trying. Every Sunday, I drive back to Grandma Ruth's porch. We sit in the silence and watch the light move through the trees, letting the hour be full instead of empty. I look at the keys in my ignition and the tag tied with twine that says I was always worth it. I wasn't saved by a car. I was saved by a woman who refused to let me believe I was worth less than my sister. I'm Audrey Forsythe, and I'm finally driving my own life.